serta para pembicara, kepada Bapak Kapus Diklat, kepada Bapak Heriawan SPD IMM, kami persilahkan. Mohon izin Bapak, suaranya belum terdengar. Mungkin teman-teman teknis yang mendampingi Pak Kapus bisa membantu.
Hah? Langsung. Langsung. Halo, suara saya terdengar udah, Mbak Dian?
Pak, sudah terdengar. Silakan Bapak.
Halo.
Sudah terdengar Bapak?
Baik. Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat pagi waktu Indonesia bagian Barat dan tentunya selamat malam kepada Bapak Ibu, para peserta diskusi pada pagi hari ini. Pertama tentunya kami panjatkan puji syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa taala. Pagi hari ini kita bersama-sama diberikan nikmat kesehatan dan kesempatan sehingga kita bisa berkumpul dalam diskusi knowledge exchange webinar di pagi hari ini. Bapak Ibu sekalian, dalam rangka meningkatkan pengembangan kompetensi dan kapabilitas yang dibutuhkan, Indonesia, BNPB melalui Pusdiklat Penanggulangan Bencana difasilitasi oleh proyek InvestDM yang didukung oleh USAID, berkolaborasi dengan University of Hawaii dan Pusat Pelatihan Kesiapsiagaan Bencana Nasional NDPTC untuk mengadakan sesi webinar. Dan diharapkan sesi webinar ini dapat menjadi wadah kedua negara dalam memberikan insight, referensi, dan sharing pengalaman terkait upaya pengembangan kompetensi ataupun kapabilitas. Sesi webinar ini bertujuan untuk menyediakan pertukaran pembelajaran dari praktek baik antara Amerika Serikat dan Indonesia dalam topik pemetaan dan evaluasi resiko bencana. Bapak Ibu yang berbahagia, saya kira itu, dan kita upayakan semoga aktivitas kita kesempatan ini diridhoi oleh Allah Subhanahu wa taala dan dapat bermanfaat bagi seluruh bangsa ini yang kita cintai bersama untuk misi kemanusiaan kita. Mari bersama-sama kita mempercepat menuju Indonesia tangguh menghadapi bencana. Dan sebelum saya mengakhiri ini, tentunya kami akan memperkenalkan para narasumber di pagi hari ini yang akan mengisi webinar ini. Para narasumber ini tentunya sangat kompeten, kapabel, dan kami akan perkenalkan. Pertama adalah Miss Munkaya Badar. Beliau adalah petugas bantuan kemanusiaan, Biro Bantuan Kemanusiaan BHA, USAID. Dan saya sampaikan bekerja sebagai Humanitarian Assistant Officer untuk USAID. Sebelum lokasi kerja di Jakarta, Bu Jaya memiliki pengalaman lebih dari 20 tahun di bidang manajemen bencana, ketahanan pangan, kesehatan masyarakat, dan program pengembangan ekonomi. Selama periode sebelumnya, ia bekerja dengan Biro Bantuan Kemanusiaan USAID di Washington dan terlibat dalam kolaborasi dengan USAID, Kedutaan Amerika Serikat, dan mitra NGO di Filipina, Ethiopia, Malawi, dan Mongolia. Pendidikan formal, Zaya mencakup gelar master dalam bantuan kemanusiaan di University Tut, serta sarjana dalam manajemen dari University Bogasisi. Lalu yang berikutnya adalah kita perkenalkan narasumber kita, Bapak Dr. Insinyur Udrek. Beliau adalah Direktorat Pemetaan dan Evaluasi Resiko Bencana, Badan Nasional Penanggulangan Bencana, BNPB. Pak Udrek adalah seorang profesional dengan latar belakang pendidikan yang komprehensif, memegang gelar dalam fisika dari ITS Surabaya dan studi ekonomi di Universitas Indonesia. Perjalanan akademisnya melibatkan gelar magister dan doktor dalam geologi atau geofisika kelautan di Universitas Tokyo. Dengan pengalaman lebih dari 2 dekade, ia memulai karirnya sebagai peneliti di BPPT dan secara bertahap mengambil peran kepemimpinan, menunjukkan keahlian dalam pengamatan bumi dan pengurangan risiko bencana, berpindah ke bidang teknik di BPPT. Ia berkontribusi pada kemajuan teknologi, diakui atas dedikasinya. Ia menjabat sebagai Direktur Sistem Penanggulangan Bencana di BNPB, diikuti oleh peran sebagai Direktur Pemetaan dan Evaluasi Risiko Bencana, menggambarkan komitmennya yang berlanjut terhadap ketangguhan bencana melalui perencanaan strategis dan evaluasi risiko. Narasumber berikutnya adalah Bapak Nicholas Sufro. Beliau adalah Asisten Deputi Administrator, Direktorat Analisis Risiko, Perencanaan dan Informasi Badan Manajemen Darurat Federal, PEMA. Pak Nick Sufro saat ini menjabat sebagai Deputi Asisten Administrator Direktorat Manajemen Risiko, RMD, di Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration, FIMA. Mr. Sufro mendukung aspirasi RMD untuk membangun organisasi kelas dunia dengan berfokus pada kepuasan pelanggan dan memperdayakan masyarakat untuk mendorong tindakan bersama. Prioritas RMD meliputi menghasilkan data bahaya dan risiko banjir, menilai dan menerjemahkan informasi risiko menjadi tindakan untuk berbagai bahaya, dan mengkomunikasikan risiko serta memberikan insentif untuk mendorong tindakan mitigasi untuk berbagai bahaya. Portofolio program RMD meliputi risk map, program keamanan bendungan nasional, program pengurangan bahaya gempa bumi nasional, program pengurangan dampak badai angin nasional, program sains, bangunan, dan perencanaan mitigasi bahaya. Mr. Supro memiliki pengalaman lebih dari 35 tahun di bidang energi, keuangan, adaptasi, resiliensi, manajemen kesehatan dan keselamatan lingkungan, dan pelaporan kinerja, bekerja dan berkonsultasi untuk industri, pemerintah, utilitas, asosiasi perdagangan, dan lembaga non-pemerintah di Amerika Serikat, Amerika Latin, Eropa, dan Asia. Mr. Supro memiliki latar belakang pendidikan sekolah administrasi, bisnis di University New York, dan École de Haute Komersialis, dan Magister Manajemen Lingkungan dalam Manajemen Lingkungan Industri di Sekolah Studi Lingkungan Yale. Berikutnya, Jesse Rosel. Beliau pembicara berikutnya adalah manajer program penilaian risiko bahaya alam, Direktorat Manajemen Risiko, PEMA. Jesse Rosel adalah manajer program untuk program penilaian risiko bahaya alam, NHRAP, di Badan Manajemen Darurat Federal Amerika Serikat. Dan tim NHRAP PEMA berperan sebagai ahli dalam pengembangan panduan metodologi, kumpulan data dan alat penilaian risiko, termasuk HAZUS, dan Indeks Risiko Nasional, untuk mendukung manajemen darurat dan pengambilan keputusan pengurangan risiko. Bapak Rosel menerima gelar master di bidang geografi, terapan, dan ilmu geospasial dari Universitas Colorado, Denver. Beliau melakukan dan menghasilkan banyak publikasi penilaian di bidang pemetaan bahaya dan risiko. Dia adalah profesional GIS bersertifikat oleh lembaga sertifikasi GIS. Dan yang pembicara berikutnya yang terakhir adalah Casey Zuzak, beliau pemimpin Indeks Resiko Nasional, analis resiko senior, Badan Manajemen Darurat Federal, PEMA. Pak Zuzak menerima gelar sarjana bidang meteorologi, GIS, dan manajemen darurat dari California University of Pennsylvania. Diikuti dengan gelar Magister Geografi dan University of South Carolina. Dia adalah profesional GIS bersertifikat oleh Lembaga Sertifikasi GIS. Bapak Zuzak telah menerbitkan beberapa penelitian dalam penilaian risiko, indeks risiko, dan penilaian kerugian akibat bencana. Demikian, Bapak Ibu sekalian, para narasumber yang sangat kompeten, saya kira kita bisa mengambil pengalaman dan pengetahuan sharing dengan beliau-beliau narasumber. Semoga bisa bermanfaat dan bisa berkelanjutan buat kita semuanya. Terima kasih Mbak Dian. Saya akhiri. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Pak Kapus atas sambutan dan perkenalannya terhadap perwakilan USAID dan juga pembicara. Baik Bapak Ibu, acara selanjutnya adalah sambutan dari perwakilan USAID. We are inviting Ms. Zaya Batra to deliver her opening remarks. Please, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Hi, good morning. Selamat pagi semuanya. My name is Zaya Badar. I work with USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance in Jakarta. Thank you very much for having me today in this webinar. I'm glad to be part of this. USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance is pleased to support BNPP's capacity in human capital and organizational systems development through our program called InvestEM 2.0. And the InvestEM program is also supporting this knowledge exchange webinar between Indonesia and the United States of America to share experiences in disaster risk mapping and evaluating. Understanding disaster risks is priority number one in Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And risk mapping evaluation in the vast archipelagic nations such as Indonesia with 17,000 islands and over 500 districts to the village level is challenging, but essential to reduce disaster risk systematically and effectively. InvestEM program has worked closely with Risk Mapping and Evaluation Directorate of the BNPB since 2021 to develop effective systems and strategies to support the subnational government in implementing risk assessment and minimum service standards. Several key supports included developing and piloting the national pool of risk assessors mechanism from recruitment, training, mobilization, and performance monitoring, and disaster risk assessment portal development, training modules development on risk assessment, and dissemination of lessons from disaster risk assessment experts during the Disaster Risk Reduction Month. The United States has been a long-standing partner for Indonesia in disaster management, capacity building, and responses. We greatly value our partnership with Indonesia, especially working with BNPB to support professional workforce and institutional capacity development, working with other agencies on early warning systems, as well as working with NGO partners to improve disaster preparedness of at-risk communities. The United States and Indonesia share many similarities at the disaster front, and there are many potential opportunities to learn from one another. We are committed to continue working hand in hand with Indonesia in this sector for better preparedness and response to future disasters. I wish a successful knowledge exchange webinar to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Batra, for your opening remarks. Baik Bapak Ibu, demikian sambutan dari Ibu Zaya Batra dari perwakilan USAID. Dengan demikian, rangkaian acara pembukaan telah kita lewati. Selanjutnya kita akan masuk ke acara inti, yaitu presentasi dari para narasumber yang nanti akan diikuti dengan diskusi. Bapak Ibu mempertimbangkan perbedaan waktu antara Indonesia dan Amerika Serikat, kira-kira 12 jam, maka kami akan mencoba mindful dan aware dengan waktunya, karena di sini saat ini di Indonesia 9.12, di Amerika Serikat sekitar jam 9 malam, dan bagi mereka akan selesai di tengah malam. Untuk itu, kami akan mencoba aware, mindful, dan akan memonitor sehingga nanti acaranya dapat berjalan secara lancar dan juga tepat waktu. Baik, demikian Bapak Ibu, maka kita akan lanjutkan ke acara berikutnya, yaitu presentasi. Untuk pembicara pertama kita telah hadir Bapak Dr. Udreh. Beliau adalah Direktur Pemetaan dan Evaluasi Risiko Bencana. Tadi sudah diperkenalkan oleh Bapak Kapus, dan beliau akan memberikan penjelasan atau berbagi pengetahuan dan pengalaman dalam pemetaan dan evaluasi risiko bencana di Indonesia, dan beliau akan mempresentasikan dalam bahasa Inggris. Sebelumnya mohon izin Pak Udreh, apakah berkenan untuk share screen sendiri atau akan dibantu oleh panitia?
Ya, saya share screen sendiri.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Udreh. Untuk presentasinya kami agendakan untuk 20 menit ke depan, dan nanti akan ada yang mengingatkan jika melewati batas tersebut. Terima kasih Bapak, kami persilahkan.
Ya, good morning and good evening, everybody. So everybody can see my slide. It's already appeared.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So, without further ado, so I would like to present because I have quite a lot of slides. So I really happy that we are facilitated by USAID to learn and also share our experience regarding to the disaster risk evaluation and mapping in Indonesia. It is previously also already mentioned as well that we are now continuous to develop risk mapping and evaluation in Indonesia, and because we are as the island nation with a lot of an archipelagic countries, so every province has doesn't have uniform capabilities, especially regarding to need for mapping technology support. And it is, of course, risk assessment require a large amount of data, and even just to fulfill the basic of data like topographic data, it is still challenging for us. And yeah, we got the opportunity to have support from IDRIP project, Indonesian Disaster Risk Reduction Initiative project that make us possible to build the multi-hazard early warning system, where of course we need quite detail of risk mapping and also some important data, but now we are focusing only for tsunamis at the beginning. And it is the challenge is how to develop complete and update data so that the knowledge assets and product produce can be continue to be developed, because maybe next year this our project for IDRIP is already finished. And another challenge is how the provision of the city district level risk assessment available throughout Indonesia. So we really hope that with the collaboration with the US, so we have now can work to produce a better map and also detailed map. And now we are supported also by USAID to build what we call as a pool of expert to provide the expert in all of the Indonesian region, mostly maybe supported by the university. So it is what we try to produce right now. We have already make a basic map for risk mapping. It means risk maps. It means that, of course, from hazard, vulnerability, and also capacity, and produce the national maps for some of hazards. And it is just the scale is very rough, here 250,000. But we also made right now support the local government to build the municipality or city level with the scale 50,000 or 25,000. with the unit sub-district. And also during the IDRI project, we have now we build about the scale of 5,000. But even it is very difficult, but now because we are also working hard to have detail of spatial planning, so it is very important to have a very detailed map where now Ministry of Spatial also very try to put hazard information or risk map as an important data for the spatial planning in Indonesia. And as you know, if we talk about risk, even maybe another formulation is also exists, but in general, risk is come from the hazard multiplied by vulnerability and divided by capacity. So it is some of information that we try to get to build our map. So here we can see the hazard use probability and intensity data, and also from vulnerability we have a social, economy, physics, and ecology. And in the capacity we have a lot of the information in especially data from the subnational resilience index. It is mostly try to capture the capacity of the local government, and also from a sub-district preparedness index. It is also try to capture from the public. And to work for this, BNPB doesn't work alone. So every hazard has what we call as the custodian agency. So as you can see here, right now we have about 13 kind of hazard that we have tried to make maps. And some has already have a custodian agency, and some part is still not have the data availability. And we try to build a guidance for this one. And to share our information, so we provide the what we call as the INARIS. It is also all of the map. We made service, GIS services that everybody can use it if when they, as let's say, open by ArcGIS or QGIS. So everybody can open. It is no password to access this information. And it is one of the platform, the main of the INARIS. You can see we have a menu on the left and also the surface layer on the right. And in the middle, you can see some information that can be downloaded, like data for some of documentation, let's say for the local risk assessment map or book that we can download from this platform. And in here we can see that we try to calculate some of the information, like a loss of economical loss, a physical loss, the possible of the cover of the people on the risk area. So it is some of the information that now we are trying to provide, but mostly now is still 200. The scale is 250,000, so very rough. And but from this experience, when we have faced some of the disaster, we can see that let's say when we try to study for the Pasaman earthquake that already and also occurred in 2022 with magnitude 6.1, and from here we try to also to map by INARIS personnel, and you can see here the dots inform about the condition of house, collapsed house, when green is a very low collapse, and the red one is a very high collapse. So from here, if we can compare this result with the our hazard map, you can see that almost all of the locations already have a good correlation, the let's say severe damage and other. So it is for us, it is so that how important our hazard modeling, because can give good or positive correlation with the disaster impact. And using this IDRIP, so actually we try to make a pilot in some areas in Indonesia, and it is something that I would like to really hope that we can support it by the house aid by hazards. So because we know that what we call like early warning or something is a learning process. Like when we have an earthquake and tsunami at 2004, everybody knows that the earthquake occur when tsunami occur when the location of the earthquake is on the sea, and also the big earthquake occur and maybe very long. So everybody understand about that one. But in earthquake tsunami in Pangandaran and Mentawai, let's say 2006, 2010, it is not the same as what tsunami Aceh occur. Let's say Pangandaran and Mentawai, the earthquake is not so strong, but the tsunami occur. So now we need to renew our learning process. And when we have a tsunami Palu in 2018 and also Sunda Strait, it is not generated by the earthquake for tsunami Palu, because it is flank collapse of the Krakatau and in Sunda Strait and tsunami Palu. The source of the earthquake was not occur in the ocean, but on the land. But the tsunami also come much faster than we calculated, because it's only about 2 or 3 minutes after the earthquake. So from the learning process, we can see that actually multi-hazard early warning system maybe can support, because it is a learning process. Maybe like industry 4.0, 5.0 can support this learning process by machine learning and also improve the threshold. Everything new, so everything of the warning also can be renewed based on our learning process. And so for me, multi-hazard early warning system needs to continue sustainable and accurate data through various resources. And like tacit knowledge and structured data can be managed maybe by using knowledge management system for make like a disaster support system for early warning system. But the problem is everything is changed very much. Let's say now we have a very nice map like here. I show you one example in Ambon. So here we have already tried to make a very nice map using a LiDAR. So it is a 5,000 scale. So from the LiDAR, we also have orthophoto in this area. So we have a very detailed information. And we discussed with a related institution regarding to the how tsunami generated. So now let's say all of the institution, especially the custodian or the data custodian agree with one of methodology to make what the formal maps or official maps for every location in Indonesia. And from here, we can make a very nice output from the IDRIP project. You can see here is a hazard map and with very detailed, because every house is already digitized here. And the color, if you have the risk map, so the color and also shows the risk in for some location. Maybe here, let's say the red color shows because the vulnerable person in this house, something like that. And from here we can see the evacuation route with color, because and also the information of arrival time of tsunami. So it is really good for us to make such kind of very beautiful, because not only beautiful, of course, it is very useful data, because we can calculate exactly also. And all of the people that now live here, even we understand that the possibilities that we also have the other people outside of this area coming, like a tourist or other. So we try to also to understand how to generate the data by calculate the real condition at how many people at night and how many people at noon. And it is what we actually try to, I hope that HAZUS can help in this part, because the important thing that we build in here is actually how the planning based on the very good modeling. Here is one of the example, as you can see here. let's say after some minutes, everybody has already felt the earthquake, and now by multi-agent, everybody here tried to escape from their houses to go to a safe zone area. But now here is the time, arrival time is about about the 45 minutes, and you can see now a tsunami is already arrived, and this red dot shows that everybody who failed to save them because of the let's say the time or also the road or street is maybe not enough, and also it's too far from this location to go to the safe zone. We calculate by minutes. So by using this one, we try to make a renew and put some of assumption. Let's say we put a vertical or shelter here, vertical evacuation, and renew the model until we can get the zero risk. So it is for us, it's very important to how to make such kind of the model that can be evaluated by the planner, by the scientists. And so finally, we can give some recommendation how many, let's say in here, the red one is our recommendation of vertical evacuation, and also how many tsunami sign that we need to put and where and how the direction of the tsunami sign. So we can avoid some of what stuck of the people who run on at the same road or something like that. So it is something that we really try to make something that this result is okay, we have a good result for this, but we know that everything is changing. The people maybe also increase number of people, and also maybe houses, and also the road is changing. So the question is for me, yeah, okay, we have a script from this, but how we can make the system can be improved, but we don't depend on the the software developer or the someone who make when it is changing. So we need to ask them again and ask them to renew our map. So yeah, I think we can do something now. Why? Because now map is so we cannot say that this show correct information. Can we use it in long term? How can we update the data because of the existing of new building road populations changing? So it is something that I would like to try to develop actually. So maybe we can build from up to date of technology right now, like artificial intelligence or some of big data and some other technology. How design system should accommodate the changing, like a growing process. Build the basic framework ecosystem, but ready to keep up with the time changing. It means that maybe we can put the script. Everybody just need to put some new file like SHP file for a new map of vector map, and also using updating by IT, big data, machine learning, and etc. Let's say they can generate their own modeling of map, so everything can be renewed. So here is my my idea actually. So let's say now we have a participatory mapping, but have a standard per mapping, and they can, let's say when we also work together with other countries, we just need to put that file to this web portal, and they can generate the mosaic or the photo or DAM, because as if everybody has an experience to process the data of the drone. Now it's very easy. We just need to put some of parameter easily, and this software can generate a lot of very nice and very good and detailed data. Maybe using the artificial intelligence, we can convert this by become a vector maps, database, and also attribute and also contour. But as you know that when we have this one, we have a database inside it, and the database, in my understanding, we can just upload it a new map, and with the same database, but we can fill inside, let's say, the house, if the household changing, or some of people die and etc. So it means that it can be dynamically generate by I hope, let's say, Jesus can help us for the some of the activity like multi-agent process to make modeling. So everything can be done by expert, but not depend on the developer. So it is something that in my understanding, if we have, let's say, input data like this, so we can update, but inside of the web or portal have a script. They can generate new model and they can generate new map, including the calculation of the the simulation of evacuation like this. Because right now, if we can see how, let's say, Google or other industry right now can make a historical map and also give us an information for the route, even if every day is maybe everything changing. So I think this technology should be possible right now. It is maybe some of an important part of us, and now we are also ready to implement some of the high technology to make a very nice and accurate data and information. And another one is about the IRB. So from the risk assessment, so every year we try to calculate, especially for the capacity of people. So based on the municipal based of the municipal, and from this calculation, actually now we are trying to make like the report about the risk profile of every municipal and also province, and it can be used by the other institution to make a planning for disaster risk reduction. And in like here in 2022, as you can see, 13 province is still in high risk, in 21 is medium risk, and every year so we can send or publish the how every province and also every municipal compared to previous, whether they can reduce their potential risk or also higher. And it is some of the time what the maps, the graphic, as you can see, we try to decrease the IRB. So it is maybe my last presentation. So some activity I think can be improved by working together with our colleagues from US, and we are looking forward to work together, and maybe we can start from one or two piloting if it is possible. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih Pak Udre atas paparan yang sangat komprehensif terkait dengan pemetaan dan evaluasi risiko bencana di Indonesia. Terima kasih juga sudah tepat waktu, bahkan kurang dari yang telah kami sediakan sehingga jadwalnya sesuai. Bapak Ibu, mungkin sedikit saya rangkum terkait dengan apa yang sudah dijelaskan oleh Pak Udre. Beliau menjelaskan terkait dengan pemetaan dan evaluasi risiko bencana Indonesia, tantangan yang kami miliki karena karakteristik geografis dan juga kewilayahan Indonesia, namun tetap ada upaya untuk terus memperbaiki pemetaan di Indonesia, baik itu untuk skala provinsi, kabupaten, dan bahkan level desa. Saat ini kami sedang memiliki Project IDRIP atau Indonesia Disaster Resilient Initiative Project, bekerja sama dengan Bank Dunia, di mana kami menyediakan peta skala desa. Selanjutnya juga diutarakan terkait dengan penggunaan dari risk assessment tersebut. Kerangka yang digunakan yaitu risk adalah komponennya hazard, kerentanan dan juga kapasitas. Kemudian bagaimana kami menjamin kualitas dari kajian risiko bencana itu dengan bekerjasama dengan para wali data. Selanjutnya Pak Udre juga menjelaskan terkait dengan portal risiko bencana atau INARIS yang dalam bentuk web dan juga personal INARIS. Kemudian kita juga ada WebGIS yang menyajikan kajian risiko bencana tematik. Tadi sudah dijelaskan juga terkait dengan visual peta IDRIP, di mana bisa ditentukan waktu ketibanya tsunami, tingginya tsunami, dan bagaimana proses evakuasi dan waktu, durasi, serta titik-titik evakuasi dan juga rencana evakuasi dan juga rambu-rambu yang diperlukan untuk membantu masyarakat bisa selamat dari bencana tsunami tersebut. Dan terakhir mungkin ada beberapa hal kerjasama yang nanti bisa kita follow up di luar dari webinar ini sehingga nanti upaya pemetaan dan evaluasi risiko bencana dapat berjalan dan lebih baik lagi. Demikian mungkin terima kasih sekali lagi Pak Udre. Kami mohon mungkin Pak Udre tetap bisa berada di acara ini karena nanti akan kita lanjutkan dengan sesi diskusi. Baik, untuk selanjutnya kita akan masuk ke pembicara kedua. Telah hadir bersama kita adalah Mr. Nick Shufro yang akan memberikan pengantar terkait dengan pemetaan dan evaluasi risiko bencana juga, tapi kali ini di Amerika Serikat. Mr. Nick Shufro, Mr. Shufro, we understand that you will provide us with an overview of the risk assessment and also evaluation in the context of the United States. We are looking forward for your presentation. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Udrek, very nice presentation, very informative. We really appreciate you sharing with us. Good morning, everybody. I will only spend a minute. FEMA's role, our mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. And we find that we have a complicated structure. So we are generally, when there's a disaster, it is federally supported, state managed, and locally implemented. And yet our complexity is nothing compared to your complexity because we only have 50 states and 6 territories, unlike the 500 communities that were mentioned earlier in the presentation. So we do have a diverse geography and a number of different natural hazards. And I would like to turn this over to Jesse Roselle and Casey Zuzak, who will actually give the presentation on our tools. We look forward to sharing with you, to learning from you. We have already picked up a lot of lessons learned, and we will probably reach out to you to learn more about your work around tsunamis. And we really appreciate the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. And thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. All right. Great.
Yes, see it. All good.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. My name's Jesse Roselle. I lead up a team called the Natural Hazards Risk Assessment Program here at FEMA. And we develop risk assessment data sets, science, tools, methodologies, and training materials to not only develop risk information, but to teach and enable our local governments to do risk assessment and risk identification as well. And myself and my colleague, Casey Zuzak, I'll let him introduce himself in just a minute. We're going to talk about the 2 primary risk tools that our team manages and uses to estimate risk. And first off, I wanted to start with a high-level program overview of what our team does. So we operationalize technical information. So we take a lot of that scientific information that's out there and use it to translate that information into risk and impact information so that locals can know what type of impacts to expect from different hazard scenarios, different hazard events, and to operationalize that information into planning and other information that people can use to reduce risk. We have 3 primary goals. We work with a wide array of partners and scientists around the nation, different subject matter experts, seismologists, hydrologists, building code experts, engineers, a wide variety of partners. We're always looking for ways to innovate and to develop integrated risk assessment frameworks across the agency to leverage this information and use it to better drive public policy and program decision making. And then ultimately to empower states and local governments, tribal nations within the U.S. And U.S. territories as well to reduce disaster suffering and to contribute to a more resilient nation. A few important points and driving goals behind our program is we really want to provide transparent and accessible risk assessment tools. We want anybody in the nation to be able to access our risk assessment tools. When we say transparency, we mean all the way down to every mathematical formula and how we calculate risk, all of the data sets we use, and how we tie all of that information. We spend a lot of time developing robust technical documentation on how all of our models work so that the scientific community can really dive in and learn more and more about how we're calculating this risk information, and it really drives to the credibility of the work we do. And we continually update this information with the latest established science, the latest established nationwide data sets, as well as hazard risk information as well. Real quick, this is our team. Myself and Casey are speaking today, but we're a relatively small team. But we work with a really wide array of partners and a really strong network of risk assessment professionals across the country. And it's a really close circle of people who are very passionate about what we do, and a lot of great interconnectivity amongst all of the federal agencies in the U.S. So we're going to talk today about two major risk applications that our team manages and makes publicly available. These two platforms are for two different geographic scales of looking at risk and two different approaches, but they're built in a framework where the two platforms are linked as well, where data sets from one feeds into the other. So we're going to talk in just a minute. I'm going to hand it over to Casey to talk about the National Risk Index, which looks at relative risk comparison at a national scale. And then as we look and move down to more of a community level and a structure level risk assessment approach, I'm going to talk in great detail about the hazardous loss model that's been around for a very long time and can do very advanced and sophisticated loss modeling calculations at a structural level and a community level as well. And here are some high-level bullets on the National Risk Index that Casey's going to talk on in great detail. At a real high level, it is an online mapping application that provides pre-calculated nationwide risk assessment analytics and is free and available for everyone to access and readily available. And in this framework, we also have HAZUS, as I mentioned, that drills down to more detailed loss information and encompasses not just the software itself, but a lot of robust scientific methods that have been developed for the past 20 years, as well as subject matter expertise input into that loss modeling platform as well. We've also got a really robust structured data effort that feeds into HAZUS as well, and then is translated into the National Risk Index. And that is primarily driven by one of the key data sets that we have right now is called the National Structure Inventory, which is developed by another United States agency called the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And it's a nationwide data set of every building in the United States. And it starts with building footprints. And then we work to continually add attributes and more information about each building to those individual structure locations and make that publicly available. And the more information we know about all of the structures in the nation, the more we know about their risk and vulnerability based on a variety of different attributes, like the difference between a residential structure and a government structure and a wooden structure and a concrete structure, for instance. And the better the science gets and the better that our data sets get, the more accurately and robustly we can calculate risk. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Casey Zuzak, and I'll let him introduce himself and talk in detail about the National Risk Index.
Thank you, Jesse, and good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Zuzak, and I'm a senior risk analyst with FEMA's Risk Management Directorate and Natural Hazards Risk Assessment Program, as well as lead for FEMA's National Risk Index within FEMA's Office of Resilience. Today, we're going to talk about the National Risk Index. The National Risk Index began as a way for us at FEMA to start understanding where do we have differences in hazard risk across the country, to allow for us to understand how we can improve return on investment or identify areas where we would benefit from having resilient actions advanced. The National Risk Index provides a free, consistent, and comprehensive approach to natural hazard risk assessment and covers 18 different hazards and incorporates social vulnerability, or how hazards are felt by different populations across the United States, and community resilience, or what communities do to prepare for, adapt, and withstand hazard impacts. The National Risk Index really provides us a way to ensure that we are measuring risk across our country. The development of the National Risk Index began as early as 2008, where one of our regions or a group of states across the country were looking for a way to identify where they could make the best improvements for flood hazard mitigation. That product in 2016 was updated and expanded to include 18 different natural hazards, as well as scope to include the entire United States, all 50 states, plus the District of Columbia. We worked with subject matter experts across a bunch of different groups. And Jesse, if you could go back a slide. We worked with multiple subject matter experts in building out different versions of data and methodology for each of the 18 hazards, as well as how they combined each of them over the course of about 4 years. And then in 2020, we released our first version of the National Risk Index. From there, we've worked with our partners across the federal family to update all data within the index, as well as incorporating additional information. And we released a version on March 23rd, 2023 of this year. That version represents our latest view of natural hazard risk across the country. Next slide. The efforts to build a product like the National Risk Index couldn't be done within our agency alone. We worked with our partners from other federal agencies like the U.S. Geological Survey, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, on leveraging their data and products to build out hazards that FEMA does not directly manage. We worked with our state partners, academic institutions, private industry, philanthropic and nonprofit organizations to understand where do we have differences in hazard risk across the country, how we can bring all the data and information together in a way that allows for it to be actionable at the local level to ensure all actors have a way to interact with our data. Next slide. Over the course of the National Risk Index development, we've worked with over 90 subject matter experts in multiple different agencies. That includes our private sector partners, federal agencies, like the United States Forest Service, the U.S. Geological Survey, the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Centers, our academic partners at the University of South Carolina, University of Central Florida, and Arizona State University. To identify the hazards to include in the National Risk Index, every state within the United States, as well as local governments, are required to maintain a hazard mitigation plan as a gateway to a number of federal resources within FEMA. Within those hazard mitigation plans, each plan must profile hazards as well as measure the vulnerability within their area to understand what assets may be at risk. This provided a mechanism for us to understand which hazards were that each community may have been most interested in profiling, as well as which hazards they would likely be looking to mitigate into the future. Any hazard that appeared in at least 25 of the 50 state hazard mitigation plans, or was a regionally significant event, or a hazard that would trigger a national response on the FEMA end, we included it. We include 18 hazards, anything from avalanche to wildfire, winter weather, hurricane, ice storm, tornado, extreme temperature, tsunami. These 18 hazards all have data that are routinely updated and maintained by a federal partner or a state agency in some cases. Next slide. In addition to the hazard components of the National Risk Index, it's important for us to recognize that people are impacted differently by natural hazards. For this, we measure social vulnerability. And for the current version of the National Risk Index, our partners at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention developed a product called the Social Vulnerability Index. And this allows for us to identify communities across the country that have a high vulnerability to natural hazards. That includes disproportionate loss, death, injuries, and injuries. Additionally, we also want to be able to capture what communities are doing to withstand the impacts of a hazard. Which communities have taken steps to ensure that they would have an easier road to recovery after an event. For this, we measure community resilience, which is similar to the framework that was presented earlier as capacity. And for this, we measure the baseline resilience indicators for communities. This product is developed by the University of South Carolina and the Hazards, Vulnerability, and Resilience Institute, and measures 6 different capitals of resilience, looking at resilience from a social standpoint, economic, community capital, institutional, infrastructure, and environmental perspective. This allows for true community resilience. Communities that have a high community resilience are more likely to be able to withstand and adapt to the impacts of a hazard and recover more quickly. Next slide. It's really important to include both of these factors. Social vulnerability as a factor will increase a community's risk. By having a high social vulnerability, these communities will see disproportionate impacts, including increased deaths, injuries, and economic losses. Where community resilience as a consequence reduction component allows for us to understand which communities have taken steps to prepare for an anticipated natural hazard, adapt to changing conditions, and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. Some factors may be included in both, but it's truly important to measure these separately, as it's important to know which communities have taken steps to not only identify which populations may be at risk to hazards, but also have taken steps to reduce their overall risk and resilience. Next slide. To bring this together, we leverage a framework that's pretty familiar across the disaster space as we're talking about natural hazard risk, where it really includes the baseline components of understanding where do we have hazards, the likelihood of those hazards, and what are the consequences of those events. Next slide. To define risk within the National Risk Index, we describe it as the product of the expected annualized loss, or how much economic loss does a hazard produce per year within a geography of the United States. And how is that loss increased or decreased relatively by the makeup of the community? How does this high socially vulnerable communities where we see those disproportionate losses and impacts, how does that increase their relative impact of a hazard? Within the expected annual loss function, or with the expected annual loss factor, we include 3 different components. An annualized frequency, or how often does a hazard occur in a given location? The exposure, or what's in the way of the hazard. And this is measured for 3 different values. Building value, or how much does it cost to replace a structure in a given location? Population, who's in the way of the hazard, and what is the likelihood of fatalities and injuries? And agriculture, which is representative of crop and livestock losses. And a third component, which we call historic loss ratio. And this is very, very similar to vulnerability functions, where it allows for us to leverage data and information from historic events so that we can understand historically the percentage of buildings, property, population, and agriculture that has been lost in a given community. And for this, the national NOAA, so our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Center for Environmental Information, collects data on hazard incidents across the country, where they estimate the losses for any natural hazard event, including building losses, crop and agriculture losses, fatalities, and injuries. This database is absolutely critical for us to be able to develop the historic loss ratios. Next slide. As we bring all of our data and information together, we look at 2 levels of geography across the country. Our county level, which is within a state, and these are a politically drawn unit of geography where they may have some local governments within, or a census tract, which is a defined unit of geography from our statistical agency, the U.S. Census. And these are units within a county that contain about 4,000 to 7,000 people per unit of geography. This allows for us to look at risk across the country at multiple levels. The top row in the orange is our expected annual losses, or an annualized dollar loss, US dollar loss. The darker the orange, the higher the expected annual losses in either the county or census tract. The bottom row is the risk rating, or what happens when we apply our community risk factors of social vulnerability and community resilience. How does that increase or decrease a community's relative risk to natural hazards? Areas in darker red see a higher relative risk. Some things that we've seen as we've looked at our data and information are areas in the western part of the US where we have our native tribes often see a higher relative risk to natural hazards. Diverse areas in the southeast that may see higher poverty rates and lower incomes often show as higher risk to natural hazards. Communities in the northeast part of the United States and the Great Lakes areas, so the Midwest, those communities are often identified as some of the most resilient communities across our country, which is why they show up as having a lower relative risk to natural hazards. Next slide. I know this may be hard to read, but it's the best way for us to get as much information as possible onto one slide about the data and information that goes into the National Risk Index. It's very similar to one of the slides that were previously shown. And it really talks about the different hazards that we included in the National Risk Index and a lot of the information that goes into updating and maintaining the database. We leverage multiple data sources from multiple agencies over multiple periods of records to come up with hazard frequency. Not all data are available for all consequence types, and we have to recognize that as some limitations and challenges. Not all hazards impact populations the same or are measured the same. And like I said earlier, without our partners at NOAA and the National Center for Environmental Information and Arizona State University, the historic loss ratio data would not be available. So by having those data sources, it does allow for us to develop products like the National Risk Index. Next slide. There's a variety of stakeholders that leverage our products. This includes using data to help inform long-term community recovery, help communities enhance the hazard mitigation planning plans so that they can begin prioritizing resources to the most in need communities, as well as the communities that have a high hazard risk. Help educate homeowners, ensure that they're taking individual actions so that they can increase their resilience to hazards. Encourage community to engage and talk about all hazards, not just the hazard that happened yesterday, but also the hazards that have credible threats. We've long discussed how building codes and higher standards and hazard resilient building codes reduce disaster losses. This paired with the National Risk Index, we can identify communities that have a high hazard risk and may not have adopted hazard resilient building codes for that hazard. This allows for us to understand where we can prioritize outreach to those communities to help encourage the adoption of hazard resilient building codes and enforcement as well. The National Risk Index is also being used to help inform portfolio hazard risk management within the insurance and mortgage industry. This database is the only freely available natural hazard database across the United States, and it provides critical information that has historically not been available. It's also being used to identify communities across the United States, to identify areas that would benefit from increased resilience funding and resilience actions, not only from the federal government, but prioritized within our nonprofit and philanthropic and private industry components. These communities are being invested in by large foundations across the country to fund additional resilience projects. It's a really exciting time to be leveraging this type of data and information. Next slide. With our most recent release, we really focused on updating our data. We have a decennial census within the United States that comes out every 10 years. Our most recent one level or most recent census was in 2000. And this allowed for us to update all units of geography and all population and building values across the country. Jesse's going to talk about some of the data and information that we use to develop HAZUS and the general building stock. And those are the same data that serve as the foundation for the National Risk Index. We've also generated a large number of generated expected annual loss data and information for our territories in the Pacific. So that includes Guam, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, as well as Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. We've also made significant updates to our methodology for coastal flooding, drought, earthquake, hurricane, landslide, tornado, and tsunami. As more data and information becomes available from the science communities and our partners agencies, it's important for us to be able to adapt and integrate that information. We're continuing to work with our partners at the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program on bringing more data and information around tsunamis, being able to recognize the difference between near shore tsunamis where communities may not be able to fully evacuate versus those that may occur in distant locations where very few people would be left in the danger zone. We're also working with our partners to understand more about how we can begin to estimate risk in harbor facilities and over water facilities. In some parts of the country, we have a number of people that actually live on boats, and being able to represent their losses is something that's incredibly challenging. So we want to be able to do that. We're working with the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program, as well as our counterparts within the California Office of Emergency Management and Geological Survey, and other Western states to build out those databases. And finally, we've made all of our data publicly available. That's something that is really important for us, is to make sure all of our data and information can be accessed to ensure that everyone can make decisions off of it. Next slide. Some of the key takeaways is those hazards, and I'm sure this is similar in Indonesia, those hazards that are very high consequence, hazards like earthquake, wildfire, tornadoes, coastal flooding, hurricane, where we have a large population and a growing population in those areas at risk, really represent a large amount of our exposure to hazards and continue to increase as a nation, and we are migrating towards areas that already have a high hazard risk. We're only increasing our vulnerability to hazards. Next slide. I did just want to touch on that, we recognize a lot of the challenges in data, in building data and information. Part of that includes being able to measure data throughout all of our territories. There's a number of hazards that are not applicable, but others that are, where we just don't have robust data, and we're working with our partners there to develop it. The other piece is within the social vulnerability and community resilience framework. The way vulnerability and community resilience are measured and quantified within those areas may be different. Resilience actions in Puerto Rico are not the same as Guam and American Samoa or the mainland US. They have different challenges. They're inherently more at risk to hazards and have a lower resilience and a higher vulnerability. And we need to understand how we can not only capture that in those areas, but also recognize it as compared to the country. It's a huge challenge that we have, and we're working through that now. Next slide. Finally, I did want to share, before I talk about some of our additional updates coming, that we have a set of best practices or things that the community has done using National Risk Index data to make a lot of data-driven decisions. This is an example of how the state of Maryland is leveraging data from the National Risk Index to prioritize evacuation zones in the islands within their state. They recognize that they have limited resources and need to make decisions to understand who to evacuate first when a threat is on the horizon, and they're leveraging data from the National Risk Index to do that. Next slide. The last thing I wanted to talk through is how we are taking steps to incorporate climate change and future conditions into the National Risk Index, ultimately projecting the future of natural hazard risk through a climate-informed National Risk Index. Next slide. This is something that with our last update, we've really have been able to begin to advance. Working with our partners at other science agencies, we're leveraging data and information and integrating into the National Risk Index to produce a climate-informed product. This allows for us to begin to start thinking about not only where is the climate changing across our country, but where do we anticipate seeing future impacts at a much higher rate. It's really important for us not only to be measuring risk, but also reviewing it with stakeholders, which is where we are. We've reviewed it with a number of experts across the federal government and partners, and are now incorporating their feedback and information. Next slide. We're starting these projections for 5 different hazards, focusing on drought, heat wave, hurricane, coastal flooding, and wildfire. This is just a starting point. These hazards have data that we can leverage today that are not only have a high expected annual loss, but also relevant in the climate change area. They also have data available from climate change downscaled models that we can leverage to project risk into the future. Next slide. We're fortunate to have access to not only CMIP-based scenarios, but also multiple ways to downscale the climate data and information through statistical downscaling and dynamic downscaling. These products produce different results, and it's important for us to understand what those results look like so that we can provide a suite of outcomes for users to begin planning scenarios. For drought, heat wave, and wildfire, we're leveraging both data sets, one that's developed through the U.S. Global Climate Change Research Program, or USGCRP, and another that's developed through the United States Department of Energy's Argonne National Lab in partnerships with AT&T and FEMA. These data sets allow for us to start thinking about how the climate is changing. Next slide. For the coastal flooding component, FEMA, NOAA, and several other agencies have recently published projections on sea level rise data. And those are the data and information we're directly incorporating into the National Risk Index because they provide a set of inundation boundaries and polygons of what may be impacted into the future in 2050, 2100, and 2150 for multiple immersion scenarios. For hurricane data, we are working with our partners at Applied Research Associates on leveraging their ability to model hurricane winds into the future, understanding how hurricane intensity and frequency is changing along the eastern coast in Hawaii. Next slide. To do this, based upon the literature that we've worked with and have seen, and the partners that we've consulted, we are working on developing a climate-informed adjustment factor. This will give us a way to estimate the percentage of increased losses versus what we see today. This is simply just a factor that we are adding to our expected annual loss value. This allows for us to leverage a similar framework that we use to calculate the National Risk Index, and this adjusted expected annual loss allows for us to include that climate change adjustment factor, leveraging both LOCA and Climber data sets, or both types of downscale data. Next slide. I wanted to show an illustrative example of how we are thinking through risk. And in this example, it's with extreme heat across the US. We know that there's a number of communities that are already impacted. Those highest impacted communities are going to be impacted just have a very high risk into the future. There's also new communities that will be highly impacted, where they will see disproportionate increases in losses. And they may not be as prepared as those other communities to withstand the impacts. We've designed a lot of buildings in the US to insulate ourselves, to keep the heat in. And now in the summer months, we need to be able to let the heat out. That's not something we've designed a lot of our structures for. In some of the older cities like Chicago, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, it's a challenge that we are working through. Next slide. And finally, we want to be able to illustrate this and be able and allow users to see where hazard risk is going based upon different emission scenarios and different timestamps at mid-century and late century using the different models. There is so much uncertainty in our measurements that we don't want to talk in exact values. Those values really should be bookends. We should be talking about what is a top scenario, what is a bottom scenario, and planning for somewhere in between. As more data and information becomes available, we are going to be able to refine what those endpoints may look like. And maybe it's a middle of the road scenario, somewhere above or below. But at this point, we're really just able to give a range. And it's one thing we're working, again, with our partners across the federal agencies within the United States, private industry, and all of our partners to build out products like this so that we can plan for not only the risk today, but into the future. Next slide. So with that, I want to go ahead and thank you guys for the invitation to talk about the National Risk Index and invite you guys to share more data and information about our products. Feel free to reach out with any questions to FEMA-NRI@fema.dhs.gov. And the QR code displayed on the screen will take users to our application online. And we're always happy to answer any questions. With that, I'll turn it back over to Jesse. And Jesse, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Casey. Great. Thank you, Casey. And I'm going to talk next about HAZUS. So HAZUS is is FEMA's loss model for 4 hazards that I'm going to talk about today. And it's been around for a very long time, since the late 1990s. And it was built after 2 major earthquakes in the United States, one called the North Ridge earthquake and one called the Loma Prieta earthquake. And both of these earthquakes caused very devastating impacts in the US. And afterwards, the United States government really wanted to know where earthquake risk was most prevalent in the United States. And they asked a few different United States government agencies to look at earthquake risk across the country. And as we got different assessments from different agencies, it was hard to determine whether risk from city to city was different or the method for estimating risk was different, because either of those different elements will change the impacts that you can model for a specific event. So in the 1990s, FEMA and the United States government through FEMA made it a priority to develop an authoritative model to standardize loss modeling capabilities across the United States government. And that's where HAZUS came in. And we're continually working to update and improve HAZUS with the latest available science, data sets, and methodologies, just like Casey mentioned in the National Risk Index. So we do this by working with a range of different experts across the United States. So Casey mentioned quite a few of the partners we worked with in the National Risk Index. Many of those same partners we work with for HAZUS. So we work with a lot of scientists and engineers, scientists for a variety of different things, like quantifying the hazard itself. We work with a lot of engineers to look at how buildings have performed and have been damaged from historic events, and how we can use information from those past events to develop formulas for calculating future losses. But we also work frequently with policymakers and planners to take this risk information and to drive action on the ground. And it requires, for a framework like this, requires continual engagement with all of these different partners. So right now, the HAZUS model can provide a variety of different types of risk assessment impacts, ranging from physical damage to things like residential, commercial buildings, schools, critical facilities, infrastructure. We really want to represent impacts that could happen from a scenario or a real event to all buildings in the nation. We can also do look at ways that different social impacts can take place from different hazards. So things like how many households could be displaced from a specific event, and from those households, how many of those households would likely seek government assistance or temporary shelter needs based on things like income level and other factors like that. We also provide the ability to estimate and simulate economic impacts to direct damages to buildings, also to businesses, and then cost effectiveness of mitigating your structures against future damages, and how investments on the front end can save you money in the long run in reducing risk. So some of the key partnerships that we work with, in particular, this is just a snapshot. There's a much larger list, but a lot of science agencies, a lot of research institutions, a lot of state emergency management offices, and we're continually finding more and more partners to collaborate with every day. So to develop our loss models in HAZUS, it relies on continually updating and improving some key components of the model. In particular, the inventory information, the hazard data, and then the damage functions that we use to calculate losses. And there's a lot of detailed work that goes into each of these that I'm going to talk about in the upcoming slides. So this screenshot on the left shows some information on building vulnerability attributes, like the information that we have in the National Structure Inventory. This is one example of some of the types of attributes that we need for structure level analysis. So things like, is it a residential structure or commercial structure? What's the replacement cost value of the building? How old is the building? Really drives losses. Does it have a basement, or is it an elevated structure? What type of building materials is the structure made out of? And in this building vulnerability attributes graphic, you'll see that some of these attributes are commonly needed for all hazards, but some of them are vulnerability information that are specific to each specific hazard type. So for hurricane wind losses, for instance, we need to know information about the roof. Does it have straps that can hold down the roof a little bit better in high winds? Does it have shutters on the windows to help reduce risk there? So the HAZUS model currently can provide loss estimates for 4 different types of hazards, for earthquake hazards, for coastal and riverine flooding, for hurricane winds, and also for tsunami losses. And with this graphic showing the different loss module capabilities that we have in the model, we have a graphic for each hazard that has the differing capability for those loss estimates. So tsunami, for instance, which I know is of great interest, as well as earthquake. We can calculate casualties, for instance, which is a really, really powerful tool used for planning purposes. And we're looking to continually grow these capabilities, hazard by hazard. Eventually, we'd like to move into tornado and drought and extreme heat and other hazards as well. So first, I gave a little bit of history on the earthquake model, but I'm going to show some of the inputs here as a way to provide a little bit more background. So we frequently work with the U.S. Geologic Survey as our authoritative data source in the United States government for earthquake hazard data. So we have a direct data feed that comes from the U.S. Geologic Survey. Anytime that there's an earthquake event, the ground motion data from that earthquake comes directly into our model, and we're able to estimate impacts to buildings. We can estimate casualties and a variety of other impacts, such as transportation and infrastructure impacts using that data feed. The HAZUS flood model was developed in 2003 and is continually evolving, and the source of flood hazard data set in the U.S. Comes from a wider group of partners, and it's really reliant on depth information as well as flood extent and also velocity for some scenarios as well. So we work with FEMA's risk map program that we're closely partnered with here at our team to gain access to data sets like this to bring in that information that we need. So we really need to know the extent of flooding and the depth of the water at each structure. And then we apply that with those damage formulas and the information we know about the structure attributes to calculate percent damage and economic impact to each structure that's in the flooded area. Next released was the HAZUS hurricane model, which was released in 2004. And we continually work to update and improve this model. Our team runs this model as well as the HAZUS earthquake model very rapidly after real events in the United States to estimate impacts from recent events, and we share those out very widely through our partnership network. For this data set, we work very closely with the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration and the National Hurricane Center under NOAA. And we have a direct data feed that comes from them as well that gives us wind speeds in the format of peak wind gusts. And we bring that into our model to estimate building damages within just hours of those hurricane advisories being made available. And then after a hurricane event makes landfall, we then adjust our models based on observed wind field data. So we work with some teams that FEMA can send out, as well as partners that are available throughout the Gulf Coast and the East Coast and other areas who are collecting wind information to really fine tune those peak wind speeds that we use as an input into our model to increase the accuracy of the model after the storms make landfall. Our newest model is the HAZUS tsunami model. This was released in 2017. A large portion of the methodology was developed after the Fukushima event in Japan, and we're continually looking for ways to improve and expand the capabilities of this model. This model can actually pair with the Hazes earthquake model, so we can calculate combined earthquake and tsunami damages from a real event. And this is uses not only flood water depth for the tsunami wave impacts, but also momentum flux, wave velocity, and a lot of other great information that's available throughout the Pacific for this model. One of our newer models, and we're really excited about it. And as I mentioned a few times before, our Hazes inventory data is a really, really big component of what we do. Our models are only as good as our science and our data, so we're looking to continually, every year, improve this information to the best of our abilities. So we just released a major model release last month with a lot of improvements to how we quantify earthquake vulnerability to all of the nation's buildings just recently. We're very excited about that. And not to mention building level information, but we also aggregate this information to the census block level, to the census tract level, to make it available as summaries at the community level, and also to feed into things like the National Risk Index. And we also incorporate other data sets like land use, land cover data sets. So what we know about where areas are developed and populated versus natural lands and unpopulated areas to better adjust our models and how they calculate losses. So the damage formulas in our models are really important. This is really one of the components that it takes a significant amount of time to develop these. They can be developed through physics-based approaches. They can be developed through looking at empirical data across time or through different studies on communities that were damaged from specific events. And the way that we develop these damage functions and the information that's collected is different hazard by hazard. So this is an example of a damage function for our flood model. And it takes for a specific structure type the water depth and calculates a percent damage to that structure based on all of those vulnerability attributes and the depth of water at that building location. For the earthquake model, we call the damage functions fragility functions. They're a little bit more complex in how they calculate losses. They look at things like measurements of earthquake ground motions in 4 different types: peak ground acceleration, peak ground velocity, and peak spectral acceleration at 0.3 seconds and 1.0 seconds. And combines that with all of the vulnerability information that we know about the structure at the location. And it's a really great and well-established approach that's been around since the 1990s, and it is widely in use both in the Hazes earthquake model and in other platforms outside of Hazes. We've also been developing open source tools. Currently, the Hazes software is built on top of ESRI's ArcGIS desktop platform, but we also have some open source tools that are freely available on our website. If you go to fema.gov/Hazes, and those are all up there and available. And we've been developing some open source tools for specific loss modeling components to be more efficient and looking at ways to compute data much more quickly. Here are some of our resources. These are all also available on FEMA.gov/HAZUS. We have a variety of links to all of our resources. But not only do we make the software itself available and all of the inventory information needed to run it, we have a variety of YouTube videos available online to teach how to use the software that's been very successful. I think the emergency management community, like everyone, it has gotten used to learning things on YouTube, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback there. Our user and technical manuals are also available online. We have thousands and thousands of pages of documentation of how all of our loss models work, all of the formulas we use, which studies they came from, and it's really well documented. And we put that out there for anyone to look at. Feel free to ask us questions, anything you want. We've also got HAZUS Loss Library, which I'll talk about in just a second. And we also provide risk assessment guidance as well as technical support for the software as well. So we really want to be a resource to teach everyone that we can how to estimate risks with our tools, and to take what they want from our methodology and maybe incorporate it into other tools as well. So I'm really quick. I'm going to go through a couple more quick sections. The HAZUS Loss Library. This is a platform we stood up a few years ago. So we've got the HAZUS software out there, and anyone can use it and develop a variety of different loss impacts for hazards that we support. But now we've started to pre-run those different scenarios and populate them into a publicly available library. So we look at it a variety of different potentially impactful scenarios that have been identified by planners, by scientists, by experts in the risk assessment field. And we pre-calculate the losses and put all of that loss information up and make them publicly available. So we do this for loss scenarios that could happen and could potentially be impactful. And we do this for a variety of real events that have happened as well, and make those available so that people can use those for planning efforts. We also work really closely with the U.S. Geologic Survey in the U.S. This work is done and populated into the HAZUS Loss Library, but we have a stream gauge network that's very robust across the United States. Not as robust as we'd like it to be. We really want it to have full coverage everywhere someday, but all of these locations here show where we have a stream gauge where the HAZUS model, we can go in and pull different potential stream gauge water level heights for different storms, and use that as an input. We can get flood models from that and use it as an input into our model and generate losses. And it's been a really, really valuable tool. So as you look at how high a stream could potentially rise from a different storm, then you could look at what the impacts could be from that scenario. And this is an example of a real-time application in a town called Hazard, Kentucky. And you'll see on the right a hydrograph from that actual stream gauge location. And we can take information from that selected gauge height, which is 26 feet above the ground at that location, and calculate losses and populate them into our library, like seen below. That shows the graphic shows the potential economic impact, but there's a lot more detailed impacts within the downloads as well. And lastly, real quick, we are transitioning the HAZUS model into the future of the HAZUS model, which we're really excited about. Currently, the HAZUS software is a desktop software platform that our user community downloads and estimates losses on their desktop PC or their laptop. We're now migrating the HAZUS software into the cloud so we can leverage cloud computing and very much increase our processing capabilities, but also remove any licensing dependencies for any of the software that HAZUS bundles with for our users, as well as look at modularizing different loss models, which really increases the efficiency of our software programming, as well as the ability for us to develop scientific methods and share them with other partners more quickly and incorporate them into our model, as well as automating a lot of our loss estimates, like bringing in those earthquake ground motion data sets and hurricane wind data sets more rapidly to make those losses available. And yeah, this is an example of some of that framework and how that would work. So we continually work to improve the national structure data through the national structure inventory and other data sets, continually work to create linkages with authoritative hazard data sets, and continually improve our damage and fragility functions and update that year by year in the Open Hazards Cloud to come up with a variety of different outputs. And lastly, we are looking to potentially expand this detailed loss modeling and simulation capability to tornado events, wildfire, drought, and other hazards as well. And that's it. I hope this was valuable and helpful. Really appreciate the time to talk to everyone today, and look forward to collaborating with everyone in the future.
Thank you, JC and Casey, for the excellent presentation. Very detailed and also very comprehensive on the USA disaster risk mapping and evaluation. I'm sure that our audience gained many insight from your presentation and are eager to jump into the discussion to ask many questions. But before that, let me allow to summarize your presentation for our Indonesia audiences. Bapak Ibu, demikian adalah presentasi dari narasumber yang berasal dari FEMA, Pak JC dan juga Pak Casey, terkait dengan disaster risk mapping and evaluation-nya Amerika Serikat, atau lebih kenal dengan program National Hazard Risk Assessment, di mana di dalamnya ada setidaknya 3 produk. Yang pertama adalah National Risk Index, yang kedua HACES, dan yang terakhir tadi sempat juga disebutkan terkait dengan National Structure Inventory. Kemudian tadi Pak Casey sudah sangat komprehensif menjelaskan bagaimana perhitungan dan juga histori terkait dengan National Risk Index tersebut, di mana itu adalah indeks nasional yang dikembangkan sejak tahun 2008 dan mulai dirilis tahun 2020 sampai 2023 ini. Jadi nanti mungkin akan sangat menarik untuk mempertanyakan apakah ini akan menjadi annual release of National Disaster Index. Kemudian tadi terkait dengan program secara keseluruhan, kita juga melihat atau mendengarkan bagaimana program ini memiliki kesamaan tujuan dengan Indonesia. Yang pertama, bagaimana nanti risk assessment information itu bisa diintegrasikan ke dalam kebijakan Indonesia, penggunaan data yang valid dan transparan, dan yang ketiga adalah bagaimana kemudian memberdayakan berbagai pihak seperti pemerintah daerah, kemudian teritori, dan juga yang tadi menarik sekali tribes, ya, suku, untuk bisa menggunakan data-data tersebut. Terus hal lain yang saya catat yang mungkin menarik juga adalah terkait dengan formula dari risk itu sendiri. Kalau di Indonesia kita mengenal risk adalah hasil dari hazard, kerentanan, kapasitas. Tadi kita sudah mendengarkan bahwa kalau risk di formula yang dipakai di FEMA itu adalah expected annual loss dikali dengan social vulnerability dibagi dengan resiliensi komunitas gitu. Meskipun nanti di expected loss pun ada perhitungan terkait dengan hazard gitu. Dari segi komponen-komponennya sepertinya cukup sama dengan Indonesia, tapi kemudian formulanya berbeda, dan itu mungkin akan menjadi pembelajaran yang cukup menarik juga buat kita bersama. Kemudian mungkin secara terkait dengan HACES ini merupakan software yang digunakan untuk melakukan tidak hanya risk assessment, tapi juga bagaimana bisa mengkomunikasikan informasi risk tersebut kepada komunitas penanganan darurat. Itu mungkin adalah hal yang sangat menarik untuk kita pelajari bersama, di mana nanti HACES bisa memberikan informasi terkait dengan kerusakan fisik, ekonomi, estimasi dampak, dan juga dampak sosial. Lalu tadi dijelaskan bagaimana HACES ini sudah dikembangkan untuk mengadres beberapa hazard atau bencana, di antaranya gempa bumi, banjir, hurricane, tsunami, dan juga ada bangunan untuk resiliensi bangunan, dan ada dua fungsi yang difokuskan, yaitu damage and juga kerentanan. Selanjutnya tadi dari Pak JC juga menjelaskan bahwa sudah ada HAZUS open source dan juga HAZUS loss library, dan bagaimana ke depannya mereka ingin meningkatkan lebih baik terkait dengan HAZUS ini dengan akses yang lebih mudah bagi seluruh komunitas dan juga mempromosikan open data and also open resources. Demikian Bapak Ibu peserta yang terima kasih sudah tetap bersama kami sampai siang hari ini. Demikian adalah presentasi dari seluruh pembicara. Selanjutnya kita akan masuk kepada sesi yang paling menarik, paling excited, yaitu sesi tanya-jawab. Untuk waktu kita alhamdulillah sesuai dengan jadwal. Untuk sesi tanya-jawab nanti kita akan alokasikan sekitar 45 menit. Ada dua cara untuk melakukan sesi tanya-jawab ini. Yang pertama adalah raise hand. Nanti mohon dari panitia bisa membantu ya untuk mengidentifikasi siapa yang raise hand, dan nanti kami akan unmute sehingga bisa bertanya langsung. Dan yang kedua caranya adalah dengan mengetik di menu Q&A yang ada di menu bawah sebelah kanan bawah, begitu ya Bapak Ibu. Baik, untuk yang pertama, karena ini terkait dengan pengurangan risiko bencana, maka sepertinya layaklah kalau kita meminta kepada Direktur Pemetaan dan Evaluasi Berencana yang mungkin paling excited terhadap acara ini untuk mengajukan pertanyaan. Bapak, sepertinya tadi ada banyak sekali yang bisa kita pelajari dan juga menjadi insight untuk pemetaan dan evaluasi risiko bencana. Kepada Pak Udreh kami persilakan.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Bu Dian, ini karena juga teman-teman mungkin yang di Amerika waktunya sudah terlalu malam ya, saya juga mencoba memanfaatkan kesempatan ini. Thank you very much for Jesse and Casey. It is really interesting for me to learn from your presentations. And frankly speaking, it is too much question that I tried to write. So first is about the methodology. So in my understanding, like what we are doing in Indonesia right now, the methodology, especially like when we have a cascading impact or hazard, and also when the climate change is one of important parameter that we need to include to calculate, let's say, hazard and also risk. How do you make an update for this one? So because as you also mentioned that when we change the methodology, maybe also the result of the hazard also changing, and also the risk is also changing. So how first we agree to change the methodology or put some of formula when we had like a new finding from the hazards occur, and how we can communicate, let's say, with the university or expert that we agree to change it. And another one is something that I really interested in is how we calculate the cost. Maybe you can help us also, because we also try right now to calculate or to compare how much money that we invest on disaster resilience or disaster risk reduction compared to the loss that we have. Because you also, I think you also mentioned about the potential loss. It is something that maybe we lack of the knowledge for maybe also from the data that we maybe not good enough for that one. And based on the data, how you can get a very detailed data is because you also issue the risk index every year. It means that because everything is like population changing, house changing, and I think from your presentation, I got the data is already like a building-based data, how you can improve this data and how you can work with a lot of the institution, including university, because you also have a very big country to update that data. And another question is about how we can use like now we say about the social vulnerability index, and we try to also talk about the baseline of resilience, how we can compare to like a risk and resilience when we call a risk index, and sometime like Australia tell about the resilience index. And maybe the last one regarding to the hazards, it is what I concern most actually, how we can work together for that, and especially for the open source tools, and how our collaboration also can improve maybe some of the capability of hazards, including maybe we have a different countries, maybe some of the facilities in hazards can be used here in Indonesia, maybe also not suitable also in US, but maybe from this collaboration we can make it more available for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Udre. Terima kasih, Pak Udre, for the very interesting questions. I know that there are at least five questions regarding methodology and then calculating loss, data access, and also data improvement, and also about the social vulnerability and also the resilience index. I think for us, it's very interesting actually to learn more on how you calculate and also determine the social vulnerability elements, because we also use that, but I think it's not as many as you use. I reckon there are 15 variables, and for us it's around 3 in Indonesia. So we kind of want to know more about that. So we welcome Jesse or Casey to answer questions. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And thanks for those questions. Those are absolutely fantastic and great conversation points. The first thing I wanted to talk about, and I think the social vulnerability piece is a great starting point. It's really important to think through place-based assessments. So when I say place-based, I'm really referring to as everywhere is different. And we need to be able to recognize the uniquenesses between different locations. Drivers of vulnerability, drivers of resilience, and drivers of risk really matter based upon who and what is in the way and where they're at. So drivers of vulnerability in the US really are centered around a lot of wealth inequities, access to resources, healthcare. We don't have a nationalized healthcare system. We have a system where your health insurance is based upon, or is a condition of employment. That's a challenge. We have a lot of gender inequalities across the country that can lead to differences in losses. Building stock. Older buildings aren't constructed with hazard resilient building codes. They're more at risk to be damaged and destroyed during a hazard. In a building that collapses in an earthquake, and as an occupant, you're more likely to see increased fatality rates. Same thing with how the building is constructed too. So older buildings may be what we call unreinforced masonry, or just like brick that can fall either outwards or inwards during an earthquake. Those are very dangerous buildings to be in. Other drivers are race and ethnicity. Different social groups have different access to different systems and products, and there's a lot of historical inequities in that space in the US, where different social groups have just different experiences, and that may make them more at risk to hazards. There's also different initiatives in the past that force populations to live in high hazard risk areas. By forcing them to live in high hazard risk areas, that includes, maybe in floodplains, devaluating housing. It may be in Superfund sites or contaminated soil from chemicals or industrial waste. So those are all some things that go into understanding social vulnerability. And what drives vulnerability in the US may be very different than what drives vulnerability in Indonesia or Mexico or the European Union. And it's important to say, yes, this may be a great method. This is a way to start consolidating and bringing data together into one place. But what are the drivers of the data may be different. In general, age, wealth, gender tend to be some of the components that you do see universally across the globe that are all drivers of vulnerability. But I'm sure there's other local drivers that should be considered as well. A couple other questions that I heard was one about how we manage changing data. And it's another fantastic question because it's somewhere where we are still learning on that as well. We know risk isn't static. Risk is ever changing. Our risk today and how we measure risk is maybe representative for the 5 preceding years and 5 years forward. Maybe a little bit more for some hazards. But as more data and information becomes available, we have to be able to incorporate that. With future versions of the National Risk Index, we've already, or even with past versions, we've seen major updates to the tornado hazard, where more data became available. So instead of looking at tornadoes as just one type, we've been able to break those down into weak, moderate, and severe tornadoes. So tornadoes that buildings can withstand the impact, tornadoes where you may see some roof damage and maybe some wall failure, and then tornadoes where you see catastrophic damage. Those all have different frequencies, different loss ratios, and different parts of our country that are impacted. So now within the National Risk Index, we evaluate those 3 hazards, those 3 subcomponents of a tornado hazard separately, and sum them together to get our tornado expected annual losses. We actually see better results because of that, which is really encouraging. We know we have other hazards that are changing, like tsunami, and how we can evaluate the difference between a local and a distant sourced event for an earthquake. We know that we have changes coming into the future as we start thinking about inland and riverine flooding, where more data are continually becoming available from not only just the United States, but the international community as well. Being able to leverage data sets that the EU develops really can help make our data more robust. So super excited for that. And it's all about talking about risk, talking about that it's changing, and recognizing that there is uncertainty in everything that we do, even though we talk about it with very specific numbers. So Jesse, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. Definitely. It's something we want to continually work with our partners to improve. And it's very data intensive and data driven, and also constantly changing.
Another question that I heard was around update cycle, or how often that we update and maintain our data. Right now, we initially strived for 1 update per year, but that was too frequent. We just aren't built to be able to manage a database and the database structure and actually making the necessary updates within a year. It's a longer time frame than that. So right now, our target is anywhere between 18 months and 2 years to update data. This gives us the ability to do two things. One, we have a static data set that allows users to begin making decisions and start understanding where they're seeing difference. And it's static and robust enough to where it can be actionable. We found that through some working groups that we have hosted, that 2 years seems to be where people are looking for data updates. So the people who are pulling our data want to see updates at least on that cycle. And it also gives us the ability to make sure that we are able to implement any database updates, make any hazard data updates, work with the subject matter experts in a way that allow for collaboration versus forcing an answer before we're ready to do that. So it still gives us the academic ability to do the research and understand where and how hazard and hazard risk is changing, to implement those changes within the database, and then ultimately produce a product while a product is already available. So 18 months to 2 years is really about where we found works really well, right now at least. For HAZIS, I think that Jesse, I'll let you go ahead and go. So,
Well, and it's not just the complexity and the challenge to get all of that feedback and get all of those improvements into the data and into the model, but also to document it well from a from a technical documentation perspective, which takes time, and also communicate the changes and why things are changing too. So like our user community needs to learn with each model how it's changed as well too. So it can be a challenge on the user side too when then the numbers change too often and too fast, right? So that ties to that as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Casey and JC, for the very detailed and comprehensive answers. It's really interesting to listen to your explanation on social vulnerability and how it was emphasized on the risk assessment in the United States, and also how to acknowledge the challenges and the limitation on providing updated data, which is also challenges here in Indonesia. And as Pak Udra said, we hope that it will be a basis for us to continue our collaboration, working together more further, and then improve our risk assessment and also evaluation. Thank you again. And then we are moving on. Bapak Ibu, kami akan melanjutkan untuk sesi tanya jawab berikutnya. Ya, mohon izin kita akan lanjut untuk pertanyaan berikutnya, di mana di Q&A chatbox sudah ada pertanyaan untuk Pak Udra ya. Bapak tadi sudah banyak bertanya, maka di sini diharapkan Bapak yang akan menjawab beberapa pertanyaan yang disampaikan oleh para peserta. Ini ada pertanyaan dari Pak Cucun Supredi dari FPRB Kecamatan Ngalian, Kota Semarang. Ada 3 pertanyaan yang diajukan Bapak. Yang pertama terkait dengan peta, apakah ada peta per kelurahan, terutama di kelurahan yang ada di Kecamatan Ngalian, Kota Semarang, di mana Pak Cucun berada. Yang kedua, apakah hasil kajian risiko seringkali menjadi dokumen yang tidak begitu penting bagi pengambil kebijakan sejauh ini? Memang tantangan ya Pak, secara umum begitu. Dan ya, tidak menjadi acuan. Bagaimana kemudian hasil kajian risiko bencana partisipatif dapat dipahami oleh para pemangku kebijakan? Kemudian untuk pertanyaan terakhir terkait dengan Inaris untuk menu lapor kegiatan, kenapa tidak ada menu yang bisa diupload dari galeri? Karena terkadang kita sering lupa untuk melaporkan kegiatan dikarenakan kesibukan mengikuti berbagai macam kegiatan. Jadi ada 3 pertanyaan tersebut. Kami persilakan, mungkin Pak Udra bisa langsung menjawab. Terima kasih.
Ya, baik. Untuk yang terkait peta, memang kita belum sampai ya ke level kelurahan. Sebenarnya memang kami sangat berharap kerjasama dengan BIG, Tata Ruang, dan juga Kementerian Dalam Negeri tentunya bisa membantu ini. ke depan sih yang saya dengar memang di level kecamatan akan diupayakan oleh teman-teman dari Kemendagri. Pertanyaan kedua, memang ini menjadi tantangan kita ya, makanya sebenarnya kajian risiko yang ada ini memang harus bisa diimplementasikan di dalam rencana penanggulangan bencana yang lalu masuk kepada rencana pembangunan jangka pendek, menengah maupun panjang. Sehingga memang kalau sudah masuk ke sana, paling tidak dia sudah menjadi acuan yang cukup representatif bagi masyarakat gitu, karena ini sebenarnya kan sangat penting sekali. Tapi belakangan menurut saya ini sudah semakin tinggi kesadaran dari pemerintah daerah untuk memanfaatkan kajian risiko ini, dan terutama juga kementerian lembaga seperti ATR dan beberapa institusi lainnya. Untuk masalah partisipatif ini juga kami sedang mencoba juga mengembangkan ini, tapi mungkin yang selama ini baru kita kembangkan itu adalah pemetaan partisipatif pada saat bencana. Ini memang harusnya yang menjadi satu poin penting juga buat kita. Yang nomor 3 ini juga ya kami akan terima usulan ini. Pada dasarnya selama ini ada info atau fasilitas yang bisa dilakukan melalui inaris personal untuk melaporkan kegiatan. Tapi mungkin ini memang perlu kita komunikasikan juga dengan beberapa institusi ataupun unit terkait di BNPB seperti Pusdalop dan Pusdatin. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih jawabannya Pak Udres. Semoga menjawab ya Pak Cucun untuk semua pertanyaannya. Kita lanjut ke peserta berikutnya atau pertanyaan berikutnya. Sudah raise hand di sini Bapak Krisna Suryanto pribadi, dan menurut info ya dari panitia, beliau adalah akademisi dari Institut Teknologi Bandung. Kepada panitia mungkin bisa langsung Pak Krisna di unmute sehingga bisa memberikan pertanyaan secara langsung.
Halo.
Pak Krisna, siap Bapak sudah
Ya,
terdengar.
terima kasih diberi kesempatan Pak Udreh. Uh, yes.
Ya, silakan Pak. Suaranya tidak terdengar nih Pak. Halo.
Ya, halo. Bisa dengar?
Ya, silakan Pak.
Thank you. Thank you Pak Udreh, Pak Casey and Jesse for your great presentations. Appreciate very much. It's very informative and also provide me with good and inspirational informations. Yeah. My question first for Pak Udreh is actually about our IRB, whether we have any policy, yeah, from BNPB to make that local government can be involved in the process more, because currently, as you mentioned before, the capacity of different local governments are very diverse, yeah, and there are difficulty that they are able. And very interesting also comment from the previous questions that how participative risk assessment can be improved in the process. Yeah. Second question for Pak Udreh is how to improve collaborations with, in particular, different various universities in all part of Indonesia, because we have a large pool of scientists there, and they could be involved in to contribute to the development of the risk model and also in the process of risk assessment. Yeah, because in most cases, what I understand is most of the scientists are involved as part of third-party organizations, consulting firms. Yeah, not as only as individuals, and not institutional collaborations with the universities. This is, I think, uh, uh, what we would like to understand from BNPB. From Casey and Jess also, I think together questions. It seems that there are different approach between HASUS and NRI. My question is whether users community, they are not confused or confused with the different approaches and how they can use the different product from HASUS and NRI and their work in its user community. And second question, also for Jess and Casey, how do you manage collaborations of the contributors? In particular, from my point of view, is with universities. How do you involve them in the process of developing the model and also in providing the database, improving the access to the databases, etc.? Those are questions I would like to understand from your viewpoints. Thank you.
Bu Dian bisa langsung dijawab kah?
Yes, please, Bapak.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Krishna. I try to answer your question. Actually, BNPB are trying to help and support the capacity building for local government, because right now, like as maybe you also know that from the minimum service standard, for risk assessment, especially for the municipal level, the local government is responsible to make by their own. But mostly right now, as you mentioned, it is supported by some of experts from the university mostly. It is what we are trying to do right now. So we focus on the capacity building for the QC for the result, and let the local government can help. But now we are trying to make it simple, especially for a hazard map. So we plan to make the better quality for hazard map or the scale. So local government can freely use that hazard map to create the risk maps and make an analysis and also recommendation. Because for hazard map, we cannot make it by every local government freely. It means that because hazard doesn't understand about the territory. So if we already provide the municipality level of hazard map, I think local government can make it easily to make their own hazard risk assessment with very good quality. And of course, we right now working together with USAID also make what we call as a pool of expert. We try to not like recruitment, but we try to help everybody who would like to be an expert. And there is some of tests, a portal to register, and we give some information and also training, but it is very limited right now. But in the future, we hope that everybody who would like to be an expert can be registered, and it is maybe every 5 years they must renew their certificate that they are eligible to do risk assessment in standard. So it is very important that they must able to make a standard map. So if every local government can make a standard map, so we can combine it, become a one of Indonesian standard as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Utre, for the answer. Then we're moving on to Casey and Jesse to answer for the second questions from Pak Krista. Do you need me to reply the questions?
I don't think so. So
please.
Regarding HAZUS and the National Risk Index and the differing methodologies, how do we avoid confusion with our regional community? Yeah, no, that's a great question. One important first step is the general building stock and all the building inventory information that's in the National Risk Index comes from HAZUS. So if those two data sets were not in sync, that would cause significant confusion and problems there for sure. We also develop program-specific guidance on how to use HAZUS for mitigation planning, and we continually work to develop more and more guidance on how to use the National Risk Index for certain programs versus HAZUS. Also in the National Risk Index, the earthquake hazard annualized loss component is directly derived from the HAZUS model. And so the HAZUS model provides that output to the National Risk Index as an input. So HAZUS is there for those detailed scenario building efforts for specific program uses. And then we hand off some of those data sets to the National Risk Index. And it's really important that we document that well and communicate it broadly as well. And then I'll hand it over to Casey for a little more detail.
No, exactly, Jesse. And I think the relationship with HAZUS and the NRI is both benefit from each other. As we think of just a conceptual understanding of hazard risk in the United States, it's a giant country. We're the third largest country in just land area. So understanding where do we have differences in risk, what we can do nationally isn't the same thing we can do at a community level. And that's really where you have the benefit of the National Risk Index to tell us nationally, where do we see differences in hazard risk? And tools like HAZUS, which allow for us to do that bottom-up type of analysis. So how can we understand which building attributes exist and what is the specific likelihood of building failure or for a specific location or within a community? In some cases, like earthquake, we have national level seismic data, and we're able to leverage HAZUS to actually generate an annualized loss for multiple return periods of earthquake. Data like that for earthquake doesn't exist for all hazards, or else we would use HAZUS to generate those losses. Currently, we're doing something similar with tsunami. We don't have a national tsunami map like we do for earthquake, but we have a lot of different scenarios that represent a broad spectrum of tsunami-genic earthquakes, as well as some landslide-genic earthquakes, and even some volcanic-genic earthquakes in the that impact the United States. And with that, we're able to assign a return period and annualize the losses that are coming out of HAZUS to create an estimate for annualized loss. We also are going down a similar path for hurricane wind, where we're able to leverage some data sources that identify what is a annual wind return or wind speed return period for a 10-year, 2,500, 50, 200, 1,000, 500, 1,000. So with that, knowing the wind speed return periods, we can then estimate impacts and then annualize those losses based upon the 7 or 9 return periods. Ultimately, that's where we'd love to go with every hazard. It's just data and technology isn't there to support that, nor are the full suite of loss and damage and restoration functions. They're just not available. So, which is why we've done a lot of what we've been able to do with historic loss data.
My second question was, how do you, for both Jesse and Casey, how do you work with universities in developing your tools and also in providing database, etc.?
Yeah, so universities are absolutely critical. FEMA itself, we are not a traditional research agency within the U.S. government. our partners at the USGS and NOAA and NASA are. So we're able to leverage some of their innovation, but we're also able to leverage research supported universities either through their endowments and scholarships and foundations or through National Science Foundation research, right? So they are out there producing these cutting edge theoretical frameworks. They're out there estimating where we can look at things that may just be a proof of concept. It may be something in a small area, and then we can work with the university on understanding how we can expand those methods nationwide. The National Risk Index, the three main components, so our hazard risk component, so which is made up of the expected annual loss, and one of the primary components is an events loss database that's curated by a university as well. Social vulnerability product, we initially used a product from a university. Our community resilience product is from a university. So without their support, we wouldn't be able to leverage, or without their support and research, we wouldn't be able to leverage their data to make large-scale data-driven decisions. They also have the ability to help expand research capabilities, especially in the hazard space. So we're engaging different universities across the country and understanding how we can better estimate and model impacts for drought. Drought's a hazard that FEMA is generally not our lead agency for drought responses. That's our U.S. Department of Agriculture. And working with them and universities across the country, University of Nebraska at Lincoln, Northern Arizona University, they are able to understand more about the drought hazard, how soil moisture plays a role. When is the impact most critical of a hazard critical to a row crop, right? Is it as soon as the seed is planted? Is it after the seed sprouts or right before harvest? Which is the worst time for it? And how does that inform our loss ratio? Those are also things that we're actively working with universities on for drought specifically. But there's other hazards, other components. Our earthquake hazard component, they actually are co-located on a university. Within HAZIS, we leverage damage functions that are funded from the Department of Homeland Security's S&T, Science and Technology Directorate, but they fund research institutions to build coastal resilience data. So they manage a coastal flood model, ADCIRC, which is the advanced circulation model. And what that does is it models hurricane storm surge and as well as extratropical cyclone storm surge. They fund the development of coastal flood damage functions that not only look at losses as it relates to saltwater versus freshwater, but also incorporates the velocity component of the water, but also the vertical components of the waves. So they have the ability to simulate those impacts within some of their facilities that then we can translate into action on our end. So it's great because we sit in a place where we are able to take amazing research that's being done by our academic partners and put it into practice to drive long-term policy decisions and change.
Thank you, Casey. Very, very useful.
Thank you, Casey, and also Jesse for your answers. We have more questions coming. Bapak Ibu, ada banyak pertanyaan yang kami dapatkan, tapi mempertimbangkan waktu, kami memprioritaskan pertanyaan yang ditujukan kepada rekan kita dari FEMA, yaitu Pak Casey dan Pak Jesse. Casey and Jesse, we have a few questions more for both of you. The first one is from Pak Johnny. I'm sure you already have covered it in your presentation, but probably you can just elaborate more. So in the US, who has the responsibility to conduct a risk assessment? and provide risk information? Are there division of roles between different levels of government in disaster assessment or management? And this software, and what is the timeline for the release of the interesting questions from Ms. Wina Natalia. How does the HAZES program account for social vulnerability and community resilience in its risk assessment tools, and what strategies does it recommend for reducing social disparity disaster outcomes? These are the questions for you, and we'll welcome you to answer it. Thank you.
Jesse, I can talk about the risk assessment portion of it if you want to take the HAZIS one. So risk assessment across the federal landscape in the United States sits with a variety of different organizations and agencies. Most of our federal partners and science partners, so the U.S. Geological Survey, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, United States Army Corps of Engineers, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, or NASA, they produce hazard data, and that's where they stop. So they do a really amazing job at helping us understand where a hazard may happen, how often that hazard may occur, what are the conditions to make that hazard worse, from a wildfire modeling perspective. How long or how intense are the flames in a location? FEMA has the authorities within the Stafford Act, which is our disaster declaration and management process within our agency, to look at natural hazard risk assessment. So taking what the hazard experts say, but understanding what are the implications of that hazard. We have some broad authorities there. Partners at the USDA do some similar work for hazards as it relates to agricultural concerns. Some other groups within FEMA or within the Department of Homeland Security, our ministry that looks at a lot of the threats to our country, both natural, man-made, and all hazards approaches. We have different groups that focus on cyber threats. Like I said, our group is primarily on natural hazards, and we focus on the economic consequences of those. And our authorities are rooted in the Stafford Act, which is the Disaster Relief Act, and the National Flood Insurance Act. So we have nationalized flood insurance program. And within that, there's a requirement for FEMA to assess the flood hazard and flood hazard related risks. So those two places are really where we see our authorities and how it's central and mostly centralized within FEMA. But there are some other agencies that do work beyond just natural hazards. Jesse?
Yeah, I can take the next question. So how does the HAZIS program account for social vulnerability and community resilience in its risk assessment tools? So Casey talked in length about how we incorporate social vulnerability and community resilience in the National Risk Index. In the HAZIS model, we currently only incorporate elements of social vulnerability, in particular in when we calculate displaced households. We look at a subcomponent of all of the households that could be displaced from an event and those that would seek public shelter after an event. And it's based on a few socioeconomic factors, things like income, whether someone rents or owns their home, and other factors too. So we take the amount of households that the total sum that would be displaced, and reduce that based on those socioeconomic factors. And we have seen in a lot of historic events in the United States, a large population will be displaced from their homes, but depending on those economic factors, they either will or will not seek public shelters. So if a community is a wealthier community, they'll maybe stay in a hotel or something like that, rather than go and stay in a public shelter.
Thank you again, Jesse and Casey, for the answers of our questions. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, kami yakin memang masih banyak sekali pertanyaan yang ingin diberikan, tapi mengingat waktu sudah tengah malam di Amerika Serikat, maka mohon maaf dengan terpaksa kami menutup sesi diskusi ini, dan kami akan segera melakukan sesi penutupan. Terima kasih sekali lagi kepada Bapak Ibu yang masih sangat semangat untuk mengajukan pertanyaan. Nanti akan ada seri-seri webinar berikutnya, sehingga nanti bisa diikuti lebih lanjut. Baik Bapak Ibu, untuk penutupan mungkin bisa saya rangkum bahwa berdasarkan hasil diskusi kita hari ini, presentasi dari para narasumber dan juga berbagai pertanyaan yang diajukan oleh para peserta, kita melihat bahwa sebenarnya ada banyak sekali kesamaan concern, kesamaan tujuan untuk kegiatan pengurangan risiko bencana, baik itu Indonesia dan juga USA, sesuai dengan prioritas-prioritas yang kita acknowledge bersama ya, baik itu berdasarkan kerangka global maupun nasional. Dan namun kita juga melihat ada beberapa kesenjangan, ada gaps, masih ada kekurangan, masih ada challenges dan tantangan, dan harapannya itu yang akan menjadi drive bagi kita untuk elaborasi lebih jauh dalam perbaikan dan peningkatan kualitas pemetaan dan evaluasi risiko bencana. Sekali lagi kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada seluruh pembicara, Pak Udreh, Jesse and also Casey, and also Nick, who already left the room. Kami ucapkan terima kasih sudah bersedia hadir sampai selesai, dan terima kasih kepada seluruh peserta. Kita berjumpa di webinar berikutnya. Selamat siang, sampai jumpa. Terima kasih Pak Andrew Duncan juga sudah bersedia hadir sampai selesai. Kami akhiri sampai di sini. Selamat siang. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, looking forward to work together with you in the future.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely looking forward to working together. You guys are doing great work.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Have a great day.